How many of you heard about this word pressure groups? I'm sure that it should not be a completely new word, but you may not have the full information, but you might have heard about this word, what is called as the pressure group. Okay, so I'll just brief you as to what are the things that we should know with regard to the pressure groups. We'll try to see that with certain examples as well. First, you should have an idea as to what is a pressure group. What is it? And then UPSC also has explicitly mentioned in your syllabus also what is called as a structure of pressure groups. So you should have an idea as to what are the structure of pressure groups. And then you should have an idea as to what they actually do, which is coming along with the definition itself. But otherwise also you should know what they actually do is one thing as to, but what are the methods or the methodology by which they do that. Okay, so does anyone know what the pressure group actually does? I'll come to the topic of what is a pressure group, but what they actually do in a democracy. Not necessarily in India, in most of the democracies there are what is called as pressure group. And in fact, the very idea of pressure group can exist only with the idea of what is called as democracy. The idea of pressure group cannot survive, say, let us assume if there is not a democratic form of government. So what they actually do is one thing, and what is the methodology by which they do whatever they want to do is what we'll have to understand here. That's very, very important. So we'll try to understand what is a pressure group, what they do, what is the structure of pressure group, what is the methodology, what is the method that they imply in achieve whatever they wanted to do. And finally, we'll also make a comparison between what is called as pressure group versus a political party. So I'll try to have an understanding of all these things. Okay. So first of all, tell me what is your understanding of what is a pressure group? Have you ever heard of this word pressure group? And what about a political party? Can a political party, just listen to my questions and then I'll take up your answers, okay? So what is a pressure group is one thing. Can the political parties in India, can they be considered to be a pressure group? There are a number of political parties in India. So can the political parties be considered to be pressure group, or are they different from the concept of what is called as a pressure group? First, can the political party be considered to be a pressure group? How many of you think the political party can act as a pressure group? How many of you think no, the political parties are completely different, they're not pressure groups? All right, so we'll try to understand as to what is the answer for that. But before that, let us try to understand the concept of pressure group. If you see the concept of pressure group, the pressure group has a very long standing. In fact, as and when the democracy started evolving, it also started to evolve. So what is a pressure group? I would say pressure group is nothing but a group of people. It consists of a group of people who have a common interest, or I would say a vested interest. And that group, which is having a common interest, what they try to do, they try to pressurize the government, as the name suggests. What they try to do? They try to pressurize the government. And why would they try to pressurize the government? They would try to pressurize the government to influence the public policy in their favor. So you should also have an understanding of what is this public policy. So ultimately, what is a pressure group? Any group or a group of people that would try to pressurize the government. And for what reason they are pressurizing the government? They are pressurizing the government to influence the policies in their favor. That would be considered to be a pressure group. And how do they pressurize the government? They follow a number of steps. They follow a number of methodologies. They follow a number of means by which they try to pressurize the government, which we'll try to discuss. So ultimately, any group that try to pressurize the government, and they try to pressurize the government because the pressure group is not in a position of influencing the policies. Who can influence the policies? Who can make the policies? Of course, who can make the policies? The government, probably. The government, maybe the legislature, whatever it is, only people who are in possession of power, they can influence the policies. And even if you take the legislature, that cannot do without the help of the government, because who has the majority in the legislature? It is a government. So without the government taking a positive stand, such change in the public policy may not happen. So any pressure group is a group of people or a vested group which is trying to influence the government, or which is trying to pressurize the government to influence policies in their favor. And that's basically what is called as a pressure group. Now, just can you give me an example of the pressure groups? So based on whatever I said, can you think of some group which has pressurized the government to make the public policies in their favor? I just want some examples. Before that, I should also explain you as to what is a public policy. And once you understand this word public policy, you will be able to connect it better. So what do you understand by public policy? Can you give me an example of a public policy? Very good. Not necessarily the formulas. Any law that is made by the legislature is going to have an impact upon the public. Or it can be in the form of laws, it can be in the form of some schemes, it can be in the form of various, I would say, national level policy, whatever it is, but it is having impact upon whom? It is having impact upon the public. So all these things, it has an impact upon their welfare, it has an impact upon their well-being. So all these policies would consider to be what is called as a public policy. So pressure group is there. There are a group of people who are trying to influence the government, and to what extent they pressurize the government. So in turn, the government makes policies in their favor for their welfare. So all such groups which is trying to pressurize the government, they all can be considered to be what is called as a pressure group. So now think of an example. In the recent past, any pressure group or any body that has acted as a pressure group which influenced the government, and by which the government has made the policies in their favor. So that's basically the entire concept of pressure group. So I want just some examples, think about it. But just keep this in your mind. If you understand the concept of pressure groups, now pressure groups in India can be, or otherwise also in general, pressure groups can be broadly classified into what is called as a formal and an informal pressure group. When it comes to the structure of pressure group, how they are classified, formal and informal. I'll just explain this. But before that, just think of some examples. Any pressure group or any body. So what can come under the definition of pressure group? It can be an association, it can be a group of people, it can be a trade union, it can be a professional bodies, or it can be political parties also, whatever it is. But they are trying to pressurize the government. And why do they pressurize the government? They pressurize the government to make the policies in their favor. So now just think of some examples. What can be seen as a pressure group, which in the recent past, in your opinion, has pressurized the government so that the government has made a policy in their favor? Very good. Farmers protest. Now the farmers have protested, and for what reason the farmers have protested? Because they're not happy. They are not happy basically with the farm laws. Before a couple of years, there were certain farm laws that is brought in by the parliament, basically supported by the government, and they're not happy with these farm laws. And what is the status of these farm laws today? These farm laws has been repealed. They have been repealed by the parliament, and for which the farmers have put a lot of pressure. It did not happen immediately. You know that the farmers have protested against the farm laws, and they were trying to pressurize the government, and ultimately were they successful in pressurizing the government? And to that extent, the farmers group that pressurized the government acted as what? They acted as what is called as a pressure group. Okay, that's one example. Can you think of some other example? India? Very good. The India Against Corruption movement, which has pressurized the government to come out with what is called as a Lokpal Act. So has that India Against Corruption movement acted as a pressure group? And thereby the government has brought in a legislation what is called as the Lokpal Act. So this is basically what is called as a pressure group. So basically what is the understanding you should have as a pressure group? So you can just look into the definition here. So what is basically a pressure group, I would say? Okay, this is comparison of constitution. I'll come to this a little later. Okay, just understand. So pressure group is nothing but it consists of a group of people who are actively engaged in promoting and defending their common interest by influencing the public policy. They basically pressurize the government and they try to influence what is called as the public policy. So I can give a number of examples which you also have understood by this time. Farmers group acted as a pressure group. The India Against Corruption movement acted as a pressure group which tried to influence a public policy. But before we understand a lot of examples, if you see the pressure groups in India, basically they are further classified into two types of pressure groups. One is a formal pressure group, another is an informal pressure group. That's basically the structure of the pressure groups. So as the name suggests, can anyone think as to what is a formal pressure group and what is an informal pressure group? What can be considered to be a formal pressure group and what can be considered to be an informal pressure group? First, let us try to understand an informal pressure group. In both the cases, what they do, be it a formal pressure group or an informal pressure group, what they do? they pressurize the government and they try to influence the policies in their favor. That is what is the ultimate end. And for which they also follow certain means, which I'll come to as to how do they pressurize the government, irrespective of whether they are formal or informal pressure group. But depending upon how they are organized based on the organization or how they function as an organization, it is classified into what is called as a formal and an informal pressure group. So as the name suggests, what do you understand by an informal pressure group? An informal pressure group does not have a formal organizational structure. It may not have an office, it may not have an office bearers, it may not have a formal structure. So all those pressure groups can be considered to be what is called as an informal pressure groups. And these are pressure groups which are very temporary in nature because they're not formally established into an organizational structure. Whenever the need arises, suddenly they may function as a pressure group. They may achieve their cause, they may not achieve their cause, but they may dissipate even before achieving their cause, but suddenly they will put pressure upon the government. So such type of pressure groups are what is called as an informal pressure group. So what is an informal pressure group? These are the pressure group does not have an formal organizational structure. But on the contrary, what is a formal pressure group then? These are pressure groups which has a formal organizational structure. They are very well organized. They have office bearers, they pass resolutions, they have good contacts probably with the government. So such type of pressure groups are what is called as a formal pressure group. Now just tell me, think of some examples of both formal as an informal pressure group. Now can you just think, I'll give a lot of examples as we proceed, but I wanted to know from your side, what can be seen as a formal pressure group? What can be seen as an informal pressure group? Can you give me an example of an informal pressure group? An informal pressure group which influence the public policy by pressurizing the government. World Economic Forum, we are talking about the pressure groups in India. We are not in general worried about the pressure group. The pressure groups in India, the questions may not come from the international pressure groups. The international bodies cannot act as a pressure group much for India because the government, who can pressurize the government? The government will be pressurized if it will have an electoral impact. So somebody does not have an electoral impact, most likely they may not pressurize the government. Okay, so we are talking about pressure groups very well within India. Sometimes not necessarily that they have an electoral impact, but still, if the policies are good, still the government might get influenced by the pressure. Just think of India locally, in India. So what can be seen as an informal pressure group? What can be seen as a formal pressure group? Very good. There is something which is called as FICCI, Federation of Indian Chambers of Commerce and Industry. Is it a formal pressure group or is it an informal pressure group? Formal pressure group. It's very well established. It has a formal structure, and to what extent it will influence, I'll explain that also. But students who have a basic understanding, probably they are in a position to connect. Okay, I'll give an example. How many of you heard about this, what is called as Narmada Bacho Andolan? How many of you heard about what is called as Chipko movement? There was local partidar agitation, I think, in the state of Gujarat for reservation for certain caste. Now, will they come under a formal pressure group or an informal pressure group? Take the example of Chipko movement. Will they come under an informal pressure group or a formal pressure group? There was no association for that particular matter. There was no formal leader. There was no formal organization. Chipko movement was a sudden movement against the commercial logging of forest trees in Uttarakhand. People suddenly came together and they wanted to protect the trees. So they didn't have a formal organizational structures, no obspheres, no resolution has been put in that particular effect. But all that they try to do is they try to influence the public policy. They try to influence the government decisions, and then the government has taken back the commercial logging of trees. Were they successful in influencing the public policy in their favor? Yes, they were quite successful. So this is an example of what? This is an example of informal pressure group. Now take the example of Narmada Bachao Andolan, and I think this is a protest that is made in the state of Gujarat against the construction of dam and the rights of the people with regard to rehabilitation. This is also largely what is called as an informal pressure group. So try to understand. And if you want to give more example, the India Against the Corruption movement, which led to what is called as a passage of the Lokpal Act. So this is a formal pressure group or an informal pressure group? Just think about it. India Against Corruption movement, was that a formal pressure group or an informal pressure group? It was an informal pressure group. There was no organized a hierarchy of leaders, there was no proper office, there was no proper meeting and all those things when they tried to influence. All of a sudden it happened and they tried to influence the government and pressurize the government to bring what is called as the Lokpal Act. So that is again an example of informal pressure group. But on the contrary, today in India, we have a lot of what is called as the formal pressure groups. So an informal pressure group does not have a proper organizational structure, no hierarchy and all those things. But on the contrary, what is a formal pressure group? It has well established organizational structures. It has well established organizational office bearers. So these are all examples of the formal pressure group. So I just give some of the examples so you can look here, some of the formal pressure groups, some of the informal pressure groups. If you take the formal pressure groups, it can be different types of bodies, but all that is common between all these things, be it formal or informal, what they try to do, they try to pressurize the government. Now, try to understand the formal pressure group. Take the example of industry related pressure groups. FICCI is there, CIA is there, ASSOCHAM is there. I think most of you would have at least heard these words. What is FICCI? FICCI is Federation of Indian Chambers of Commerce and Industry. CIA is Confederation of Indian Industry. ASSOCHAM, again an industry related pressure group. And then you have a lot of trade unions like All India Trade Union Congress, Center for Indian Trade Union Congress, professional groups and all those things. But however, you don't have to know about these pressure groups. But the point is, how far do you think they act as a pressure group? How far do you think that they influence a public policy? Now tell me, what is the role of FICCI, CIA, ASSOCHAM in influencing the government policies? In what areas do you think that they pressurize the government in influencing the government policies? In their favor, of course. Now what is common in between all these bodies? They are related to trade and business related groups. And they have certain interest as a business body, as people who are doing business, they have certain interest to be protected. What would be their interest? What would be their interest, do you think? Probably yes, to pay less taxes is their interest. Less taxes, policies, probably the labor laws in their favor. Less intervention, regulations in terms of running the business. So they'll be favorable. If these things are good, it will be favorable for them. So if you look into FICCI, CIA, ASSOCHAM or these bodies, they do try to influence the government policies, especially in favor of bringing more FDI, which is in their favor, because they'll get more investments for running the business, less regulation, less taxes, and better benefits for running the business. So they regularly engage in discussion with the government and they try to bring policies in their favor. And similarly, the trade unions in India can also act as a pressure group, but that is again an example of what is called as a formal pressure group. I'll give examples also. Say for example, FICCI was very instrumental in formulating what is called as the GST. When the GST amendment was brought in, FICCI had played an instrumental role in how to make this amendment and how to make this GST laws. Now, what would be the relation for GST laws and formal pressure group like FICCI? Because they are business, if you are going to impose more tax, it is going to affect them. So they are very much involved in these things. So they acted as a pressure group in formulating the laws probably in their favor. And FICCI, CIA, ASSOCHAM, they also have played an instrumental role in formulating what is called as Make in India policy. How many of you heard about this Make in India policy? Make in India policy, can anyone tell me what is the crux of this Make in India policy? Make in India policy is making India more of a industrial hub. More and more manufacturing has to be done in India. So rather than bringing it from outside. So they have played an instrumental role in discussing with the government and formulating that particular policy. Now similarly, take the examples of trade unions, All India Trade Union Congress, Center for Indian Trade Union Congress, though it can also act as a pressure group. They are also an example of a formal pressure group. So what would be their interest? Trade unions. And to what extent do you think that they may influence the government policies? Related to the minimum wages, related to the working conditions and other service conditions, better pensions probably, leave rules better, so increase in wages. So these are all the areas where which they can influence the government. So they also do regularly engage with the government. And there are a lot of professional groups in India. Say for example, IMA means Indian Medical Association, the Bar Council of India, the Indian Bank Association. They are all professional groups, professional people. They can also act as a pressure group. Can you give me an example of Indian Medical Association which is acting as a pressure group? Have they influenced the government policies? Have they influenced any laws in the recent past which the government wanted to bring in? During COVID? How many of you heard about the Medical Council Act? National Medical Commission Bill, in fact, it established for what is called as the Medical Council of India. In the National Medical Commission Bill, the Indian Medical Association was very instrumental. How many of you heard that the government wanted to bring in one reform where they will allow what is called as the Ayush doctors to perform what is called as allopathy medicine? Have you heard of this? In fact, one of the problem today with the health sector in India is people who complete MBBS, the shortage of doctors to perform service in the rural areas. Most of the doctors who are doing the MBBS, they're not willing to go for the rural areas. In fact, do you know that the government also gives them some credit rating? So those who perform in rural areas for some time after completing the MBBS, if they want to do the post-graduation, some extra marks will be awarded to them. But despite these efforts, many of the people who complete their undergraduation, that is MBBS, they don't want to serve in the rural areas. Of course, you know, rural areas, they may not have better facilities. So many people are not happy with this serving in the rural areas. So in order to avoid that, the government was trying to bring in a reform and they're trying to amend the laws in our country that they would allow the Ayush doctors to perform what is called as the allopathy medicine. So what do you understand by Ayush doctors? Ayush doctors is Ayurveda, Unani and all those things. So who has not studied the MBBS degree? But in the rural areas, people are to give the first aid and all those things. So the government brought in that all these Ayush doctors will do a bridge course. And after doing this bridge course, they will be eligible to perform what is called as the allopathy medicine. But this was severely opposed by the Indian Medical Association. As a pressure group, they try to dilute this particular law. They're not happy the Ayush doctors performing what is called as the allopathy medicine. Maybe I'm not getting into the pros and cons. I'm only trying to say as to what extent they are able to influence the government policies. Okay, so they can act as a pressure group. Bar Council of India. How many of you heard about Bar Council of India? Can they act as a pressure group? What is this Bar Council of India? The Bar Council of India is a statutory body. Try to remember this. It's a statutory body which today regulates the guidelines, syllabus and all those things for the law profession in our country. Now this Bar Council of India, can they influence, have they influenced the government policies in the recent past? Any influence that they have made? In fact, recently the government wanted to allow the foreign law firms to come and to play a role in India. That the foreign advocates also, the law firms can also establish their firms in India and they can take up cases in India. But that was severely opposed by what is called as the Bar Council of India. They thought that it would affect the Indian lawyers. So to that extent, they didn't allow it to happen in India. So they act as a pressure group, protecting their interests. So try to understand, all they do is they try to protect their interests. Indian Bank Association. How about Indian Bank Association? Can they influence the government policies? Have they influenced the government policies in any way? One way is the Indian Bank Association regularly go for strike and they ask for pay hikes every year. So they do take some pay hike which is in their interest. Apart from that, any broader policy that they have played an instrumental role? How many of you heard about what is called as an NPA? Every bank will have something what is called as an NPA, non-performing assets. So what shall be considered to be non-performing assets? They do have played an instrumental role in determining as to what can be considered to be an NPA, which will broader understand, I think, when your economics is done. Have you ever heard of what is called as the bankruptcy code? Insolvency and bankruptcy code. Have you heard of this? When any company goes bankrupt, they can file what is called as a bankruptcy code. And this is a law that is brought in by the government, which majorly was influenced by what is called as the Indian Bank Association. So they try to influence the government policies in number of ways. But the question here is, can anyone tell me what is the means that they employ whenever they are trying to influence the government policies? What is the means, or in other words, what is the methodology by which they try to influence the government policies, these pressure groups? So in general, pressure groups means that they would pressurize the government, influence the policies in their favor. Now the question is, what is the means? The end is to pressurize and to bring policies in their favor. But what is the means? How do they get it done? How? Writing editorials, or I would put it in a different way, is through what is called as propagandizing. Propagandizing using social media or newspapers, whatever it is. Okay. So that is one way, of course, yes, that can be done. Is there any other means by which they try to influence the government policies? So strikes, protest, yes. But do you think a formal pressure group would engage in strikes? Most likely. Sometimes they may take, but it is not a long protest. Say, for example, the Indian Medical Association may go for a protest for 1 or 2 days. The Indian Bank Association employees might go for protest for 1 or 2 days. So protest is definitely a way of pressurizing the government, but which is more likely to be taken by what is called as an informal pressure group. Again, there's no hard and fast rule. I'm not saying that the formal pressure group would not take it, but rather a formal pressure group would take a certain set of other means because that is more favorable to them. Have you ever heard of a word what is called as lobbying? Have you ever heard of this word lobbying? In fact, there are 3 major techniques, and today one more technique has also been added. A legal measure has also been, legal action has also been added. So I'll discuss about all the 4 means. Just keep this in your mind. But now come to the informal pressure group. So an informal pressure group, they also try to influence the government policy. But what is the difference between a formal and an informal pressure group? Is they're more organized in their structure, they're not organized. So here they are more organized and there is a possibility that they meet their ends. But here they may not even meet their ends. Even before that, they may dissipate because it's more an informal structure. But today, the informal pressure groups have also come to play a very important role. So we already discussed some of the examples. Say, for example, these are all examples of informal pressure group. So now the point is, what is the means that they use? So we'll have to understand the next point. Once we understand what is a pressure group, what they do, what is the structure of pressure group. Now the next point that we have to understand is what is the means that they employ in pressurizing the government. So I would say there are 4 important ways. There are 3 important things that I have written in here. I'll just add one more thing also. Of late, it has also become an important way. So you can write the means by which they can pressurize the pressure groups. There are 3 important means. One is electioneering, other is lobbying, and then the third thing is propagandizing. And in addition to that, today they also use what is called as legal action. So I'll also discuss about that. So basically they use 3 important means. What is, again I'm repeating it, electioneering, propagandizing, lobbying and propagandizing. So these are the 3 important ways. So just think about it. What does it mean by electioneering? Electioneering, lobbying and propagandizing. So again, I'm saying it is no hard and fast rule that it is only a formal pressure group will use this particular technique. It can be a combination of the techniques as well, or it can be one particular technique as well. But there are certain techniques which a formal pressure group would usually prefer. And there are certain techniques an informal pressure group would usually prefer because that would be more easy for them. That is the route that they prefer. That is way by which they can achieve their ends easily. And in addition to that, you can write one more thing, what is called as legal action. They can also initiate what is called as legal action. Okay, first let me take the last one, legal action, and then I'll come to the other areas. What do you understand by legal action? Giving them a legal notice. How? They can file a PIL. They can go to the government and file a PIL. Say, for example, there are a lot of, can an NGO, can it act as a pressure group? Can a non-governmental organization, can any civil society, can they act as a pressure group? I'll make you understand broadly as to what this non-governmental organization, civil societies and all those things, but I think you'll have a very basic understanding of that, which I'll discuss when I take up the governance part. Maybe tomorrow I'll start the governance part. So basically all these non-governmental organizations, civil societies, all these organizations are not for profit organizations and they are mostly voluntary in character. They don't work for profit and they voluntarily they wanted to serve the people. So can these NGOs, civil societies, can they also act as a pressure group? And mostly they'll come under a formal pressure group because they are more or less organized. Now, can you give me an example of how these NGOs, civil societies, they can also act as a pressure group where they have taken a course of what is called as legal action against the state, and thereby they're trying to influence the public policy? Very good, ADR. So we already learned that, I think. So how ADR acted as a pressure group? So for example, recently the electoral bond was struck down. Although the government did not yield, but somehow it has gone to the court. And ultimately the court has struck it down. So thereby there's a change in the public policy right now. So through the legal actions also, which means that today a lot of NGOs and civil societies, they can also file what is called as public interest litigations. Through public interest litigations, can there be a change in the public policy? Yes, it can also lead to change in the public policy. So that's one way. Okay. So, but these legal actions are mostly taken again by what is called as a formal pressure groups. So these are all the four important things, but legal action is a very minimal method. But what is majorly used by the pressure groups is these three techniques. One is electioneering, lobbying, and what is called as propagandizing. Now, can anyone tell me what do you understand by electioneering first? So we'll take it one by one. So once you understand this thing, it will almost be done. What do you understand by electioneering? Candidate from the pressure group contesting for election. Is that right? The understanding of electioneering? Now, one basic understanding you should have is pressure group never contest election. So when you talk of pressure group will never ever contest election. That's basically what is the requirement. The only exception as a pressure group which will not contest election is a political party. Political party may also come under a pressure group. And the only difference between the political party being a pressure group and other pressure group is that the political party may contest election. Their representatives may contest election. But electioneering does not mean the members of the pressure group contesting the election. It means something else. Very good. What does it mean by electioneering? Electioneering is a process by which a pressure group support certain political candidates or support certain people to win the election, because they understand that if these people win, they would make the policies in their favor. Because the pressure group understand that the people they are supporting is positively predisposed their cause. And once I will help you to win the election, probably once you come to the position of power, once you form the government, you will make policies in my favor so that I help you to win the election in the first place. So any pressure group which is trying to win somebody to win the elections, so that the entire process is what is called as electioneering. Now think of how a pressure group can engage in what is called as electioneering. So electioneering means, suppose I am a pressure group, I will help someone to win the elections. So why I am supporting him from win the election? There is an element of what is called as quid pro quo. What is this quid pro quo means? That give and take policy. I'll give you something, you will give me back something. So first, for which I'll have to help you to win the elections. So whatever I do to help you to win the election as a pressure group is what is called as electioneering. So can you give me an example of what are the ways by which this electioneering can happen? One is that they can provide funding. If they are capable of giving the funding, they can give funding. Say for example, big corporates in India, can they act as a pressure group? And how do they act as a pressure group? Do they give electoral funding to the political parties? Do you think that the political parties, the corporates are running a charity by giving funding to the political parties? Or do they expect something in return from the any party which is forming the government? So they do expect something in return. They may expect some change in the taxation laws or in the labor laws which could be in their favor. So this is an example of what is called as electioneering. Electioneering is a process by which a political party help a person or help a party to win the election in the first place, so that they can be making the policies in their favor. That is basically what is called as electioneering. But political funding is not the only way by which electioneering happens. There can be other ways also. So for example, somebody who is not having the funding, somebody has a funding, they can give the funding, but somebody may not have the funding, so they can also do it. How? What are the other ways they can do it? Say, take the example of a trade union. A trade union may not have big funds like a corporate, but can a trade union act as a pressure group, and can they engage in what is called as electioneering? How they can engage in electioneering? They have votes. They can go for canvassing, they can endorse a particular candidate or a political party, they can go for door-to-door canvassing, helping them to win the election. That is also one of the way. Okay, so either that way, this way, or they can engage in what is called as propagandizing. They can give publicity to certain political parties and all those things. So whatever means that they follow, so whatever means by which they help the parties to win the election, so all those things will come under what is called as electioneering. So basically electioneering means even before they come to power, they help give them the support. Because with an idea that once they come to power, they'll make policies in their favor. That's basically what is called as electioneering. So electioneering is all that they do to help someone to win the elections. Because if they win the elections, they'll make policies in their favor. So all those things are considered to be what is called as electioneering. Now the second type of means that they follow is what is called as lobbying. What do you understand by lobbying? And in fact, lobbying is seen as always seen with a prejudiced mindset, or you always see it with a negative connotation. Lobbying is not a very negative word. Lobbying in general means, what do you understand by lobbying? In fact, lobbying is very much regulated in the Western countries. But in India, lobbying is not very well regulated. But otherwise, lobbying is a positive word. What do you understand by lobbying? What do you understand by lobbying? Lobbying is basically a process of negotiations, discussions. So through the process of discussion and through the process of negotiation, you are trying to make and understand the other party as to what is the benefit of these things. So that's basically what is called as lobbying. Now tell me, this process of lobbying, basically discussion, negotiations, who is better placed to take this particular route? Is it a formal pressure group or is it an informal pressure group? Say for example, the farmers wanted to repeal the farm laws. What is the route that the farmers have taken? Have they taken lobbying or they have gone for what is called as propagandizing? Anyways, I have not explained propagandizing, but tell me why it would be more appropriate, or it will be more of a formal pressure group who will take up the route of what is called as lobbying than an informal pressure group. What could be the possible reasons? Because as I already said, there's no hard and fast rule which route they would follow, but certain routes are more preferable to them because it is easier for them. It is how they can do it. So I would say lobbying is more appropriate, or lobbying is usually followed by a formal pressure group rather than an informal pressure group. What would be the reason for this? Because they have structured and they have networking and they have been liaising with the government for a long period of time. Say for example, today FICCI wanted to fix an appointment to the Prime Minister of India, they can get an appointment to the Prime Minister, they can get an appointment to any of the cabinet ministers because they have the resources to do that. Suppose let us assume a small caste group which is fighting for reservation. Do you think that they can immediately take an appointment to the government? Is it possible for them? The government may not even look into that unless and until they feel that it may have an impact upon their electoral prospects. So for which immediately they may not get the appointment, but FICCI can do that. Is it possible for the Indian Medical Association to get an appointment to the government? They can do that. They have very good networks and they have been functioning for a long time. They are very formal in their structure. So only pressure groups which has an established network, which has better connections, they may go for what is called as lobbying. It may not work for an informal pressure group. Okay. So take the example of this farmers pressure group, farmers who acted as a pressure group, and thereby they have repealed the farm laws. They were quite successful in repealing the farm laws, but it did not happen immediately. It happened after 2-3 years of their consistent pressure being put upon the government. Now just think of this, the farmers as a pressure group. What were the tactics that they used in pressurizing the government and thereby repealing the farm laws? What is the tactic they used? Is it electioneering? Is it lobbying? So the difference between electioneering and lobbying is, electioneering is you are trying to help someone to come to position of power. And whereas lobbying is somebody is already in a position of power and you are trying to influence his viewpoints in favor of you by discussions and negotiations. And then the third thing is what is called as propagandizing. I'll explain that also, then you tell me as to what is the route that the farmers have taken. What is propagandizing? Now propagandizing is trying to create a publicity for your cause. And how you can create publicity for your cause? You can create publicity by protest, rallies. You can create publicity, of course, legal protest, because right to protest is a fundamental right. Of course, legally you can protest. Protest, rallies, or through social media propaganda. So today social media is widely used, social media can be used, press can be used, and for all these means are used to publicize as to what is your cause for which you are fighting for. So that's basically what is called as propagandizing. Now, why people might take up propagandizing? It is because of the fact that the government may not initially be willing to listen to them. The only way that they can make the government to turn back and look at them is by propagandizing. So now, after understanding all the three things, tell me what is the route that has been used by the farmers as a pressure group? So especially with regard to the formulas, I'm not in general going for all the various. In fact, the farmers act as a pressure group not only with regard to the formulas. If you take farmers, there is something which is called as minimum support price, which affects the farmers. That is also the farmers try to influence. There's something which is called as farm subsidies. Every year, government might come and give the farm subsidies, which is again influenced by the farmers. So they act as a pressure group. I'm not discussing all the things. My question is specifically related to this formulas. Now the formulas has been repealed, and to that extent the farmers acted as a pressure group and they're quite successful in repealing these things. Now you please tell me as to what is the tactics that has been used by the farmers. Yes? Mix of all. Have they engaged in electioneering? How many of you think they have engaged in electioneering? Electioneering is you are trying to put someone in a position of power. Have they engaged in electioneering? No, the state has not made this law. So you'll have to see who is capable of making this law and who has made this law. So if the states are, even if the elections have happened in between, but even if any state come to power, they have nothing to do with repealing a law which is made by the parliament. So you should focus upon only the central government. So have they engaged in what is called as electioneering in this case? So it was not electioneering, but it was a combination of what is called as propagandizing and lobbying. Of course, it was more of propagandizing, and then after the propaganda was there, the government realized that the movement is getting stronger and stronger, and if the government don't listen and and if they're not having a discussion with the farmers, it may impact upon their election prospects. And then it was more of a propagandizing initial stages, and at the later stages I would say it is also of lobbying, because the agriculture minister, I think, has discussed with the farmers representatives and all those things. So I would say it is a combination of what? It is a combination of lobbying and propagandizing. I would say propagandizing, more of propagandizing, and then of lobbying, and thereby they were able to influence the government policies. So all that you should carry forward from whatever I've discussed is that there is no hard and fast rule as to what kind of means that they would follow, but they would definitely follow what is working well for them. Now, definitely FICCI would not come and do what is called as protest and rallies, and they do not have the numbers also to do that. But they have broader networks, and if they can easily, through a phone call, they can get an appointment with anyone. In fact, how many of you know when the Prime Minister goes to a foreign country, he carries a delegation of members of FICCI and all those things. When India is engaging in some trade agreement with foreign countries, so these delegations also go with them, and they try to discuss and they try to influence the governmental policies. So it is very much easy for them because of the network they have established over a period of time. And people who does not have that network, so normally they may go for what is called as propagandizing. And if they have a electoral mass support, they may, at the time of elections, they can go for what is called as electioneering as well. So these are the three border means. In addition to that, what is the other thing that you have seen? The legal action. And legal action can be done by anyone. So mostly if these things are not working out properly, they can go for what is called as legal action, which basically means filing a public interest litigation. And through the directions of the court, there may be a change in the public policy. So these are the broader things. So now what are the things that you understood? So is your understanding of what is pressure group is clear, and the structure of pressure group, and the structure of pressure group is broadly divided into formal and informal pressure group. And be it a formal or an informal pressure group, what is the means that they use? It can be electioneering, lobbying, or propagandizing. And what is the means? And legal action as well. So it is not a hard and fast rule who has to follow what, but probably what will best suit them. That's the technique that they are going to follow it. So now coming to one more question, just think about this. If you have to make an assessment of the limited knowledge that you have got as to which pressure group is very successful in India today, is it a formal pressure group or is it an informal pressure group? How many of you think it is the formal pressure group who are very successful? How many of you think the informal pressure group is more successful than the formal pressure groups? Nobody thinks? But how many of you are of the opinion, although yes, it is very much true because the formal pressure groups have a long existence. And even today, the resources are far better than an informal pressure group. Take the resources that FICCI has got. It cannot, you cannot say an informal pressure group will have the same resources. So definitely, yes, they are quite successful, no doubt in that. But do you also agree that the informal pressure group over a period of time is also catching up? They are also doing really well because of what is called as the propagandizing and the digital revolution. Probably the social media is being used as a potential tool for propagandizing. So once there was a question in UPSC as to make you an assessment of who is doing well. So whenever such a question comes, do not take a very biased stand, I would say. You can definitely say because of the resources that the formal pressure groups have got, they are quite successful in terms of influencing the public policy. You can take the examples of say FICCI or the Indian Medical Association and you can use it as an example. But at the same time, you can also say that the informal pressure groups are also doing well. They're also catching up because of the digital revolution or because of the literacy rate going up. So they're also doing well over a period of time. But definitely, it is still the formal pressure groups who have an edge over the informal pressure groups. That's a stand probably you can take it. Okay. So this is one area probably if a question comes, you can do it.